What's going on, everybody? Welcome. It's Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio, and today I'm joined by Josh Hodges. Josh, thanks for being here. We're going to start our chat in just a minute. To the audience, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for spending some time with Josh and I. And if you love what we do, if martial arts is a thing that's important to you, and you believe, as I do, that the world would be a better place if more people trained, well, then head on over to whistlekick.com and check out the things that we do, and maybe consider supporting us in something that we do. And if you want to go deeper on this or any episode we've ever done, whistlekickmartialartsradio.com is the place to go for that. Well, Josh, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Good to meet you, Jeremy.
It's great to meet you as well. Thanks for coming on. You know, I have this very weird job in that I talk to people like this, and we go 0 to 60, right? We start with, I don't know you. I don't get this whole dossier on you. You know, it's not like a job interview where I get a resume and I do all this research. And if anybody out there who's been paying attention to the show for a while knows I don't do any research intentionally because the audience doesn't do research before they listen to the show. And so I try to put myself in their place. But here we are, two guys, and I know that we both love martial arts, and that's all I know to start with.
That's a good start. So, it's great to be on the show. I've known Andrew for a number of years. In fact, when I was in the military, and I'd done a lot of training before that, and my sensei at the time said, "You're joining the military; it's going to wreck your martial arts training." And sure enough, it changed the scope of it. But when I got out of the service, I ended up working in New England, and at the place I was at, a very rural area in New Hampshire, there were really no. There was some martial arts, but it was nothing that was like, it wasn't what I was looking for. So I put a Craigslist. That Craigslist was a big thing back then. And I put an ad out, and then Andrew said, "Yeah, I like martial arts." And I said, "Well, let's meet together." And then we just met and trained a couple of times, and then here we are several years later, connected sort of.
What a riot! Yeah. The audience has gotten bits and pieces about Andrew's journey over the years with the show, and I've heard bits and pieces, but I don't think I knew this part. So it sounds like he wasn't actively training at the time.
I think he was.
Okay.
I don't know. He was in Walpole. I was down near Brattleboro, and I began teaching around that time. And I initially started teaching at, let's see, what was it? It was one of the colleges. It was Landmark College in Putney. And it was a real cool experience. It was like one of my first times teaching on my own. I had previously, when I trained, Sensei had handed the keys over to me. He's like, "Okay, you train a lot. You like training. Come in and clean up, and we'll waive some of the fees, and I'll need you to help teach some of the kids' classes." So that was kind of like my first exposure, kind of getting ushered into the process of teaching. Yeah,
you stick around long enough, and they give you a job.
Sure.
It's kind of what we do at Whistlekick too.
Right, and then so I got into this gig, and I was actually talking to one of my senseis. Like, "Man, there's just nothing up here." He's just like, "Well, why don't you start teaching? You've been doing this long enough. Just go out there and do it." I'm like, "Well, okay. Do I need a license?" "No, just go do. That's how you learn." And it was a great experience. Putney was a cool place. The college was immaculate. And at the same time, I was also got a gig teaching at another college in Vermont. It was more of a performing arts school, and I taught at the dance department. And this was and I started seeing these dancers, I teach them, and then man, they're really picking up on this. I must be a good teacher. But no, they just had such a body and awareness already, because they're studying dance professionally, and they just happen to do martial arts through a little elective. And I got kind of a big head. These guys are great. And then I learned real quick, But no, it was a cool experience. Landmark was for kids with different styles of learning. And it was autism and ADHD, and you had to really change your approach.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, honestly, we teach in a group setting, but you have to reach each individual. So you still have to kind of fine tune to each individual. And here, this was just sort of like amplified that need. And it was a trial by fire, and it started off strong. And then after a year, maybe 2 years, it kind of dwindled. And someone came in with a mixed martial arts class, and that took precedence. So I ended up going a different route and taught a little closer to where we were in New Hampshire. It was actually, we lived like New Hampshire. I had to do a grocery shopping in Vermont, and I worked in Massachusetts. So we were down in there, and like, where I live now in Florida, that just like blows people's minds that you can hit 3 states in one day.
It's
But
that
yeah,
Brattleboro
that was
corn.
kind of the start.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So that tells us how you got teaching. What about, let's rewind the tape even more. How'd you get started training?
All right, let's step in the Wayback Machine.
Okay.
So I think maybe I was 6, 7, and then I had a cousin that was like, I was the only child. So when my cousin, who was about my same age, maybe a year older, came down, whatever he was into, I was immediately into it. It was like, oh, you like X-Men comic books? Yeah, that's my thing too. Oh, you like G.I. Joe? Yes, that's my thing, right? So he showed up and he said, he's been doing karate. Oh, cool. And like, I wanted to learn about it and everything. And my parents were like, yeah, okay. Well, we'll see. Karate's expensive and like, it's impulsive thing, kid, whatever. But I kept on asking about it. And what really sealed it was like, when he got out of it, I got his gi, and it had this dragon on the back, and it was so cool. And so they took me to the elementary school where they were teaching karate. And at that time, it was kids and adults all together, and it was mostly adults. So I'm a young fella, 7, 8 years old, something like that. And I was watching it, fascination, a little scary. These guys are mean business, very strict. And I think I was done after their first kia, like this earth shattering, all this room with men. And I was like, my parents said that I cried and I needed to go home at that point. So that was my first experience into starting martial arts training.
To those of you out there who say ki-is, ki-ups, whatever you want to call it, don't work, there's your proof.
Yeah, you can scare kids.
Like, you can terrify children, if nothing else.
But then I got back into it. Like, a buddy of mine said, hey, there's a dojo in town. We need to train. And like, at the time, like the popular culture thing of Karate Kid 2, Ninja Turtles, and I guess that was just coming out. And I guess professional wrestling was like a big thing for kids at that time too. So like, yeah, we definitely need to learn martial arts. Of course, we need to learn martial arts. So me and my buddy got into it at local dojo, and it was next to a shoe repair store in an old abandoned little part of strip mall kind of thing. And I remember there were holes in the drywall. They had a punching bag and one of the Century little stretch machines, and then just a floor. And it was a tile floor, and that was it. And
was there an awkwardly placed post?
What's that?
Was there an awkwardly placed post?
I don't recall, but it wouldn't surprise me. Memory's not serving too well, but it was, not your state of the art type of thing, but man, we trained so hard. It seemed at the time, it was like, Sensei walking around with the shinai, horse stance, you break the horse stance, you get a little whack on the leg. And I think would probably be frowned upon. And today, and I don't know if it's a method. I don't know if that's the method. Probably not preferred at this point in time, but that's what we had. And we were exposed to it. Right. And like, regardless of rank, age, whatever, every Saturday you fought. And we would, put on gear and fight. And it was Shotokan karate in name, but this was in South Georgia where I grew up. So it's Shotokan karate, karate, K-R-A-T-Y, karate. It was, and then we would speak Japanese in a Southern accent. Ichi, ni, san, shi. It was unique experience. It was wonderful. A lot of kids involved. gosh, you don't realize how spoiled we are today with like the amount of information and YouTube and the internet and the research and like you could actually talk to a master or talk to
Yeah.
someone who's been training for a long time. We had Sensei Carter and we had the one Karate Do Kohan copy,
Mm-hmm.
and we had Black Belt Magazine and the Century
Mm-hmm.
Martial Arts catalog. That's it. That's what we had, and we did that, and it was great. And we waited for Chuck Norris movies to come out and Van Damme movies to come out, and we loved it. And I did that till I was about 16 from a young age there, and uh, took a break because of soccer, whatever competing interest that the 16-year-olds have.
Yep.
And I remember coming back one night after being off, and it was fight night, and I took a spinning heel kick right
Mm-hmm.
to my nose, leveled me, and I got a crooked nose from it now. So that was my last training at that dojo for a while, and then graduated high school, got into college, got back into it, started over at white belt, and had another false start there, and then as soon as I graduated college, I got back into it and have been doing it ever since. So that's probably 25 years ago. Just like pretty steady training. The last couple of years, I haven't really been in a dojo per se, or had a particular sensei, but I've had folks that I train with
Mm-hmm.
on a regular basis at some point or time or another. And yeah, um, primarily trained Shotokan karate.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time when I was in the Navy where I moved around a lot. There might not be a Shotokan dojo in the particular area, so I'd find something. I trained Wado for a little bit, and that's very similar. Same name, same. The forms are the same. The stance is slightly different. But then was very fortunate when I went to uh, my duty station in Virginia in Norfolk. There was a dojo right outside in Newport News, right outside the shipyard. And so our ship was in the shipyard for a lot longer than it was supposed to be, which caused a lot of grief on another level, but and stress. But the dojo was right there, and it was the same thing. Every time I had the time off and that door was open, I was there. And like, I mean, for a while there was a season where I was training 6 nights a week,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just sort of like eat, breathe, sleep, train, eat, breathe, sleep, kind of thing for a while. And, ended up teaching there a little bit and had the key to the dojo. And it was a pretty cool, unique time. And it was neat because, like, that was a larger organization. They were tied into a larger organization, and their head guy, who's like, there's pictures of him floating around with him and standing next to Funakoshi. He's the one that actually came down like 3 times a year and like would do like clinics and belt tests, and that's how my Don test was under him, and it was just a really cool experience, like to see this 80-year-old man that's had this wealth of experience, like kind of critique you, ask you questions, and then you know, um, it was amazing. This guy individual would just even close to 80 would do a full split and then pop up front kick and like just like oh wow, that's how it can be. And I guess there's certain gifted individuals that can do this, but it also takes a lifetime of dedication and everything. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it just sort of blew my mind. Just being exposed to what's out there. And I've been fortunate enough to train a couple places where I got to meet a couple of these, like, I guess what you call masters or whatever. And, I don't know them by any means, not claiming any credit or for having been there, but just like to see it in person, it's like there's a feeling that changes in the room when
Mm-hmm.
some of these guys walk in. Um, yeah, and I kind of like it. You remember the Star Wars movie? It's like one of the reboots, I guess, from the early 2000s, where Yoda kind of hobbles in there, and then he draws the lightsaber, and he's bouncing all over the walls,
Mm-hmm.
and right, and then
This is
like
the best
it's
part of
back to
that movie.
normal. And you could kind of see that same kind of analogy here. I mean, these guys aren't bouncing off the walls, but like the energy that would come in these old men when they got out on the floor and just like did Heian Shodan or a simple kata or one step, and and then and they hobble off and like just are an old man again. But it's just it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of the term master in the context of martial arts, but
Sure.
what you're describing, that is mastery,
Yeah.
right? That because you can feel it, right? And anybody that's been around someone who truly has mastered any skill, I don't care if it's martial arts or cooking or an amazing massage therapist, you can feel the difference just by sharing the room with them while they're doing the thing that they are incredibly great at.
Oh
And I
yeah.
love that feeling. I love being around people like that. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's somebody who is playing music that I don't even particularly enjoy. I want to be in the room because I want to be around that feeling. I thrive on that energy. It's great.
Yeah. There's something about like, and someone described this to me as like, you take a seed and you look at a tiny little seed and there's all this potential right there. And if you follow the right formula, you put it in the ground. You know, there's a potential for a martial artist in us. You put them in the dojo or the dojon or the school and repeat and like engage. And, like some people are going to bloom into one thing, but then like those that already have that potential, wow, it's something else, right?
Yeah.
Myself, I'm an enthusiastic hobbyist. I don't make any claims of mastery, or that I can beat anybody up or anything like that for sure. But even at the time, I was training so much, and I was kind of average at best. But it's just like um, there was a quote from oh gosh, I'm gonna forget his name, Kurt Vonnegut, right?
Mm.
He tells a story about like how he was a kid and he was like on some sort of field trip or something, and he's talking with one of the counselors there, and like the guy's like, "Whoa, what do you do?" He's like, "Well, I play clarinet, but I'm not very good at it." And it's like, "What? That's not the point. The point is you're doing something, you're enriching. Do you enjoy it? Yeah, I enjoy it. Well, that's it. That's the point. You're a more interesting person. You're more enriched because you do these things,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not about the competition of you know. It doesn't necessarily have to be about a competition or have to be about mastery, but there's something. I'm rambling, but it is something about like fulfilling your potential, whatever that may be, and I think pursuing anything, and in this case, martial arts or music or whatever. There's something about putting the time in, pursuing that discipline. It's very rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the contemporary modern world, the social media world, has convinced people that unless you are the best at anything, you shouldn't be doing it, which of course eliminates the ability to learn how to do something,
Yeah, that's 99% of the people.
which is both ridiculous and illogical, right? Because how do you get good at anything? And one of the examples when I'm teaching seminars, a lot of what I'm doing is helping people think about how to think about martial arts or how to train martial arts, how to get better at martial arts. And I often use the example, I've never seen anyone yell at a baby for failing to stand up when they're learning how to stand up or to walk or to run, right? I've never heard anyone say, "You're a stupid baby, stop wasting your time." And yet, so many people will do that. And the worst case is when we do it to ourselves.
Oh yeah,
And yet, how do you get better at anything? You have to suck first. You have to be terrible at it before you can be good. And if you stumble on one of those rare examples where you're really good at something out of the gate, well, then your potential is that much more than everyone else's.
yeah. And sometimes I've seen that with kids in classes.
Mm.
That's sometimes almost a stumbling block, like to be for it to come easy to you. You need to challenge them that much more. And sometimes in a classroom setting, might not be able to do that because you got to bring everyone along. And like they burn bright, but they burn out. And that's a shame. But that's not always the case. It's just speaking generalities here. But
Yeah. Well, I
and
want to.
that kind of reminded me what you. Go ahead.
I'd like to address that because we have a
Yeah,
good
go
number
ahead.
of instructors, and this is something I don't know that we've talked about before, but I've observed it enough, and I feel it's worth mentioning. That tends to happen in my observation because the instructors praise the result, not the effort.
Hmm.
So you get all these other kids who, or people, just right, it doesn't just have to be kids. You get all these students who are not very good, and so the instructors will say, "You're working really hard. Good job. Keep working hard," and they're praised for their effort. And then you get somebody else who has a lot of natural talent, and the instructor will praise the result. And
Hmm.
then when they get to a point, and in my experience, it's usually that advanced phase before black belt, they hit this wall where their natural talent doesn't quite carry them all the way, but they haven't built the discipline muscles.
Hmm.
And they're frustrated and they quit.
Yeah.
And so we as instructors have to make sure that we're, even if you're saying, wow, you're really good at this, we have to make sure that we're praising the effort, that the effort is the priority.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And it's like it's there's a lot of variability in there too, right?
Of course.
I think of like the example of like, well, why did little Johnny get promoted and my little Billy not? And Billy's better than Johnny.
Right.
That particularly with kids dealing with parents and their perceptions, it adds a whole nother couple of layers to that onion too. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's definitely something to be mindful of that you're giving the reinforcement for the thing you want to see, right? And ultimately, the thing you want is the effort and putting in the time, because it's not an end game. Oh, I have black belt. Ding, I won. Game over, right? It's an infinite game, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to um, continual improvement, right? That's I think about, and I've used this example of teaching the kids. And I remember back in boot camp, and I was lousy, lousy sailor, lousy military guy. Didn't have the right mindset for that, and that's me, But
Mm-hmm.
I know the shining of the boots in boot camp. I'm like, what a mindless, worthless waste of time and my effort. And I would get it just enough to pass inspections. But then you look down the row, and there's a kid that has put a mirror finish on a leather boot. Like, what did he do different than what I did?
Mm-hmm.
It's persistence. That's what it was. He's just like continually like little circles, continual persistence. And he's like, I just ran out of time. That's as shiny as I could get it. And this is someone that was paintish. If he'd given enough time, he could have made it better,
Mm-hmm.
incrementally better and better and better. And I think that's just a pretty good analogy. You're constantly polishing. It's all going to be a little bit shiny as we constantly polish. So
There's always room.
yeah. So, well, something you said kind of reminded me about like, we were kind of talking about how individuals have to be treated a little different to kind of fulfill their potential.
Sure.
I look back at this is my tangent, like having been part of major uh, karate organizations out of Japan. Um, there's a structure and there's a right way to do a thing, and if it's not the doctrine, then you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if you disagree, apostate. Right? And that's once again generalities, a little over the top, but there's some truth to that. But if you look back at Funakoshi, the only pictures we have of him of doing martial arts, he's an old man, much higher stances, doesn't look like anything like the Shotokan karate today. But if you look at all his first generation students, each one of them did it a little different than each other
Mm-hmm.
because they definitely each had different aptitudes, abilities, and things that, different bodies. And it seems to me just using logic, that maybe they were taught that way by their teacher to do it a little different because it served them better. And that's the good thing about an organization is because you get this wealth of knowledge, um, but it's great to start you off because you have this structure, but at some point it becomes shackles, right? And that's kind of the thing that I've my complaint, or the ponderings that I have about it. Um, the Fuhari analogy there of like, and the movie that I think it analyzes it in modern times best is the Lego movie,
Mm.
because he goes from like, no, it must be done this way, and I think of Legos, you got to put the instructions just like this, and you follow the instructions every time, but at some point you don't need the instructions, and at some point you're like, well, I know how these bricks work, I can put it together any way I want. And that's kind of gets to that idea of mastery. You don't necessarily have to follow the step one, step two at that point. And I think organizations are great at establishing that step one, step two, but um, in the administration of it, they kind of, I think it's a model that's at some point it can become a hindrance. But
I think
anyway,
mastery
that's,
occurs outside the realm of memorization,
oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
And what you're talking about with, a lot of your larger mainstream martial arts organizations, especially the ones that seem to come out of Japan and Korea, there is that right way, that wrong way.
yeah,
And if we take a look at post World War II Japan, the Japanese got really, really good at building out systems
hmm,
that scaled incredibly well with very high quality.
hmm.
And
The Toyota model, yeah,
exactly, exactly. If
yeah,
we take a look at automobiles, the Japanese are incredible at building really high quality, relatively low cost for the quality vehicles. But a if I want something that is artistic, if I want a craftsman to create a car, if I want a true master, one person to create a car, I'm going to pay a lot more money for it. It's going to look different, and it's going to violate every single one of the principles that made that system work when we're talking about its scale. And
hmm,
I think it makes a lot of sense. If I'm teaching classes, if I've got my students, I want all of my students to learn Pinyon Shodan the same way.
oh yeah,
But
you
when
have
they've
to
been doing it for
order.
5, 6 years, I want them to start making some tweaks. I want to see the core of what I gave them in there. But I think if I don't see some personalization in there, some nuance, then they're probably just trying to mimic me, and that's only going to take them so far. I want them to
Yeah,
be the best version of them, not a poor version of me.
yeah, that's true, because like I saw that with the organizations I was in, like with a Shotokan in particular. Um, at the time I was coming up, Mr. Nishiyama was a big deal, big name, um, pioneer, brought Shotokan to the United States, particularly the West Coast. And, in the 90s and the early 2000s, before his passing, he was like, he's an old dude. And old people, even if you're incredible at karate, you're an old dude, and you're not going to move the same. But his students, you would look at them, and they kind of moved like that old guy, or at least a certain generation of them did. Right? There was a generation that you looked a little different, but they would have higher stances because an 80-year-old guy is going to have higher stances. So yeah, there's a lot of that going on, and yeah, that was kind of I've always had like kind of a stocky body type, and one of my instructors is like tall and lean, like, and we're just not going to move the same. Although he still was like one of the best instructors I had, my karate's not going to look like his. It's
Nor
just the physics of it's not going to work the same.
right. It shouldn't, because you each have advantages and disadvantages in your body type depending on how you're implementing things. Right. If you're more stocky and shorter, your center's a little lower. You've got some mass. You can apply that in certain ways. Whereas maybe a taller person can stay further out and
Hmm.
you use distance to their advantage. And it's not that one is better. It's that this is the reality in front of me. Take an extreme example. If I'm missing an arm, I'm not going to spar the way you spar. I can't. It'd
Hmm.
be ridiculous to try. I've got to do some things differently.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with sparring. You got to play your own game. When you start playing the other person's game, it's cat and mouse, and you're the mouse,
You're the mouse
at
for
that point.
sure.
So yeah, it's and that's the beautiful thing about it. And I relate it back to like it works great with analogies because like you talk about music, it's the same thing. When someone who's really good, if they're just sticking to scales in a very rote way, that's not going to sound very good. They can do a scale great, but when somebody just like breaks free and can just improv anything,
Yeah.
oh wow, that's where it's at. At least that's that's a level of something.
Right.
It's kind of hard to say like martial arts is one thing too, because I think there's a lot of complaints, or I hear a lot of complaints, and maybe I may have contributed to some of these complaints about the current state of tournament. And man, they don't do it like they used to. And man, it's a bunch of garbage. Point tag. But no, they're incredible athletes out there doing some amazing things. But that's not the martial arts I was brought up in. It's a little different, but they're doing some really cool things. It's just another little aspect of it. It's a facet of it. You're looking at it from a different angle, and you just get that facet of it. But it's really cool. The analogy of we're all kind of climbing that mountain, and you depending on what route you take, it's going to look different every time. Um, I get a brief exposure to some Chinese martial arts when I was in college and a young man, and the more I learned about that, the more I found that there's a lot. Oh gosh, you only have two arms and two legs. There's going to be a lot of similarities. But the approach was pretty neat. Like when you get down to principles, the principles are going to work no matter how you apply it. And that's why when I would teach, I would like try to. I was a boring teacher. I really was because I would focus on principles. I was all about like, I guess for baseball, I'd be like, no, let's talk about batting practice. Let's talk about So, but like one of the principles was like body alignment, connecting breath to your movement. Gee, that kind of works with any number of things, martial arts, whatever your flavor. And I thought that was just so cool. And like they had the approach of like weaponize your entire body. Huh. Well, if you take that approach when you're trying to figure out kata, what that means, that puts a whole new spin on it. Like the punch isn't always a punch. Maybe like the drawing back. And now I'm elbowing, like whatever's close to someone can now be attack or defense. I thought that was cool. And one of the other aspects of it that it was never really explained to me anywhere else, but it makes a lot of sense. Is like we would train till we were so tired we couldn't force it with strength anymore. We would just be physically exhausted. And then we would do another set. And that's when we had to learn to kind of cheat because in the cheating of like, okay, I got to make my stance longer. I can make my arm work because I just can't put any strength anymore. Well, in that cheating, that's how you actually learned the principle behind what the thing was, the thing you were doing with the thing. And I just thought that was pretty cool. And it's funny, I did, this is a aside, and I bounce around like a pinball machine with some of this.
Well,
I
you listen to the show.
apologize.
This is a hallmark of what we do. I just let people loose, and
But
you just go off on tangents.
I had this really cool class. This guy came over from UK, and he was a professor of kinesiology, and I think I'm saying that word right. I've only read it, but anyway, he knew all about biomechanics and movement, and PhD teaching college courses. I don't know, maybe 30 years martial arts experience in Shotokan karate. And like his explanation was like, you hit the thing with the thing. And I'm like, when he did it, I understood, but like, this is college level communication, the thing with the thing. Okay, great. And he made the point. It made sense. So anyway.
I like that. I had a Latin teacher who got really excited. We got to a certain point where there were two words we could string together that meant just about anything. And I think it was basically do the thing.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the best generic way to translate it now. And he pretty much told us that we could use that as a cheat on just about anything moving forward. It was an interesting class and an interesting teacher. So let's kind of go back. You talked about something I want to get into a little bit more with principles, and the
Mm-hmm.
idea of teaching principles, and you expressed that made you a boring teacher, which I think I took a little bit of offense to because I'm a teacher of principles, and now I'm hopeful that people don't think I'm a boring teacher. So talk to us. What do you mean by teaching principles? Let's start there.
Well, the, maybe there's not a causality there between that. I am a boring
Maybe you
teacher,
teach principles
and
and
I
you
do
are
teach
boring.
principles. So maybe that doesn't hold true for you. So I think I would, and I think you'd see this with or I would see it when I go to a clinic, room full of black belts, and we all do a white belt kata for an hour. And this like happened again and again, and I'm like, huh. Usually in school, when the teacher emphasizes the same point again and again, there's something to that, right? So I'm like, wow, what's going on here? We were talking about contraction and expansion.
Hmm.
I'm like, oh, hard and soft movements. Oh, okay, so there's something to that, and if you take these principles, they can explain why you're doing this crazy thing with your arm here. If you understand the principle behind contraction and expansion and dropping weight and rotational energy and then shifting and things like that, then you're not just like flailing your arms and legs about. You're actually doing something. You're becoming a lever. You're becoming, part of your opponent when you move, or delivering a punch more solid, or with your full body, not just your hand or your arm or your shoulder or whatever. So that's kind of what I mean by principles, without
Hmm. That makes
getting
sense.
into it terribly deep. But I just thought that was just like the mechanics of how everything works. If you understand that, you can do something simple or something complex, and it'll still work the same, right? It's the same formula. Um, I had a teacher that would say, "You're only as good as you are at your basics," and boy, that kept coming up again and again too, right? So there
What's
must be
the root
something to
word?
that.
What's the root word in basics? Base. How do you build a
Yeah,
tall building? Strong foundation.
yeah, absolutely.
How do you
And it still takes that, and
make a
that's
building taller? Make sure you stabilize the foundation.
oh yeah, and that's a truism, across many things, and that's why martial arts is so great, because it does have that universal appeal from that. Just like there's a when you look at it, it's almost philosophical, because yeah, you gotta practice the basics to get good at what you want to do, whether it's business or um, music or whatever.
Hmm. Absolutely. So I think I heard you say towards the beginning that you're independent. Now you're training on your own. You're responsible for your own training. Not that you're training solo, but you are
Right.
dictating how you're training.
Yeah, and then part of that's a choice, and part of it's just like, as I've grown older and have a family and a 9 to 5 job that doesn't involve martial arts, and I'm not really teaching anymore. Like, kind of COVID put the kibosh on that, and just never got back into teaching after that.
Sure.
And so my priorities have shifted to like, okay, um, I still want to train,
Hmm.
but I also have my kids the age they are. I probably need a little more family time. The weekend being the only time that I'm at home with them, and I don't personal choice. I don't choose to drive 45 minutes in the car to train an hour to drive 45 minutes back,
Yeah. Yeah, it,
and that's kind
we
of
have a
that's what it
limited
would be.
amount of time in our day, in our life, and we've got to
Yeah, and
allocate
that's
that
kind of where I'm
individually.
at, and and believe it or not, as the universe works out, when I took this job here down in Tampa, Florida, I got put in an office. In the office right next to me, it's a gentleman that's been training Shotokan karate for 30 years. To find someone that's been training for a long time in any martial art, but not
Hmm.
much less the same,
Hmm.
and like, hey, we got a gym at work. Well, we start the day at 7. Why don't we just meet like at 6 and just go through some kata? Yeah, sure. So we kind of do that on a fairly regular basis when schedules allow. So that's where I'm getting my fix right now, and have been for like the past 2 or 3 years.
Oh, that's really cool.
So yeah,
It,
it's just worked out that way. There are some cool folks in the area here where I'm at, where they do like a weekend black belt gathering
mm,
type of thing, and that's about an hour north of me. And I've done that. I haven't done it in a little while now, just because of schedule, but
mhm.
you know, kind of keep in touch with them. There's a really great instructor just south of me, but I just can't seem to make it on the schedule because he teaches Wednesdays and Sundays. But I have trained down there a few times. But yeah, I'm cool with where I'm at with it. But it's just like my priorities have shifted. I'm not going to be in a dojo 5, 6 days a week now. Maybe if there was one down the street, maybe if it was the right one. But geography and schedule have dictated this is where I'm at, and it's working out pretty good.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I think is so important because people get an idea in their mind of what being an active martial artist means. And that if you're not checking all of those boxes, whatever boxes they think they need to check, then people either feel guilty and they'll get defensive or they quit. And I
Yeah,
look at that and I think it's so silly. Defensive is one thing. I can work with that. I can tell you, look, I'm just happy you're training. But when people quit because they can't do 5, 10, 20 hours a week, they can only do 2 or 1 or an hour a month. An hour a month is better than 0 hours a month.
oh yeah.
It doesn't
Well,
matter what you're doing. That maybe you're not progressing. And I've heard people say that. Well, I just didn't feel like I was training enough to progress. Okay, so you're just going to completely regress?
but
How about staying the same? That's worthwhile. You worked hard to get to that point.
yeah. I mean, progressing is, what does that mean? We're moving towards a goal, or maybe our priorities have shifted, and like I'm still learning or relearning the kata that I've been doing for a long time, and if I can do it one time and like, oh, that was kind of cool. You're still like, you're scratching that itch, but I think you're still, there's more ways to grow, right? Like you watch like a root structure. If there's an obstruction there, it finds a different way. There's a lot of ways to grow. Um, and the idea, like what you're saying, of progress. Well, if I hadn't been in a tournament, then you're not really doing karate. Well, okay, by your definition, I'm not doing karate, but I'm okay with your definitions, maybe for you, and I'm okay with what I'm doing.
You get to
And
define
I think
martial arts
that's
for you.
yeah, and it's I think I remember when I would travel, we had family in Los Angeles, and we would travel out there. I'd always bring my gi with me
Mhm.
because there's just some really cool dojos out there,
Yeah.
and I would I remember I was at the Santa Monica. My wife said, I'll walk the pier with the kids, and you're going to go to this dojo here. Like, yeah, yeah. And there was a older guy at dojo, and he was like, and I was like, hey, yeah, I'm just in town visiting. And I called ahead, and he knew someone that I knew, and we kind of. He's like, yeah, that's cool. He said, so how old are your kids? And he said, oh yeah. well, you know what? You'll get back into training in about 18, 20 years.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, that was his take on it. I kind of understood, but I've actually seen that in the dojo too, where you have like a generation that comes in, they're older, and then they have the time they're at a stage in life where they can devote more time to it, and maybe I have that in my future, and that's cool if that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
So
I've got a couple in my school right now that their kids reached an age, and they're both jumping back into training. And I think one of them had been out for 8 years, and I think the other had been out for 15 years. And it's been really fun watching the excitement, but watching the wheels start to click back in. Like you can see, it's like, hey, you just remembered something because you're
mhm,
moving really differently than you did last week, and it's cool to watch that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a lifelong, or it can be a lifelong pursuit.
Can be.
Like it's an art form.
Hmm.
Um, I'm definitely, I think, with the tournament and the fighting facet of it, that's kind of a little more limited for most people. You know,
Not everyone wants to get punched in the face.
what's that?
Not everyone wants to get punched in the face,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and that's
I don't
okay.
mind it, but it's just like I'm telling you, I work in safety. If I show up with a busted nose and a black eye, it's a bad look.
Yeah, that's hard to get people to take you seriously when you're showing up and you look like you.
Yeah, yeah. But oh well, neither here nor there. um, yeah. Um, anything else? I'm running out of steam here.
No, that's okay. You're doing great. So we'll start to wind because I think we did. We talked through your story, and the part that I think is most important here, that we've underscored, and we've talked about this on the show, but we haven't talked about it much lately. I really want the audience to hear what Josh is talking about this because at no point in anything that you've said, Josh, have I considered you less than other martial artists or that I really hope he starts training differently. Like not hasn't been one thought along those lines, because to me the beauty of martial arts is that it is as much or as little as you want it to be. And if
Yeah,
I was talking to somebody earlier today in an interview, and when they started, they were training 5 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's amazing. Great. That's also called a job.
yeah, yeah,
Not everyone has that. And if that's the standard we set, then so few people get to participate and take the benefits of martial arts. You know what? I've seen people become better versions of themselves on day one. I've seen people train a little bit and get some wonderful benefits. And so I think if we remember that, there's absolutely no reason that anyone should ever feel like they have to set down martial arts. If you choose to, that's your thing. But I don't want anybody out there to feel like somebody is telling them, you don't train enough, so you are not a martial artist. You're not a karateka. You're not whatever. And if somebody is telling you that, connect me with them because I'll set the record straight for them.
well, that goes back to you know, man, we're here 75, 85 years tops, right? Some people, their genetics and health works out that maybe a little bit more. Unfortunately, some people a little less. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know, at the end of the day, if you're doing something that you love and you get enrichment from it, that's the beautiful thing of this thing that we're all like just obsessed or in love with, however you want to call it. And life does get in the way sometimes, but it's not really in the way. It's just your priorities shift. And um, Sensei Okazaki came up with a little short training kata, and it did all your blocks and all your punches, and then it was the same
Cool.
pattern. It did all your blocks and all your kicks because if you do it with your hands, you should be able to do it with your feet. That was his
Sure.
thing. And he says, practice this. And he was talking mainly to college students. He said, and this kata was designed where you could do it basically in place
Mm.
or with a couple of steps. He says, college dorms are small.
Mm-hmm.
You kids don't have a lot of time in the day. He said, just do this 20 minutes a day, and that'll be good karate. And here's a guy devoted his whole life to it. He's preaching the message just 20 minutes a day. Just take a little bit. And like the key is persistence.
Yeah.
That's with anything. If you're going toward that goal of mastery, it takes persistence. And I think that's the thing that I've heard talking to everyone when you leave the dojo or you leave the clinic or whatever. Hey, keep training. Or for a long time it was keep training kid, but they've still dropped off kid, you know. But it's like keep training, and that's the key to it. And there was there's some story, and it turns out it's fake, but it's a great story anyway, of Sun Lutang, who was a Chinese martial arts and Bagua, Xingyi, Tai Chi, and all these things, and all his students were gathered around him at his deathbed, and he calls somebody, oh, yeah, and like he like brings him close, and he said, "I tell you the secret of martial arts," and he like writes something in his hand, hands it to him, and he dies right there. And they open it up, it's the character that means practice.
Hmm.
Fake story. His daughter actually said, no, that didn't really happen. But that's the story that was
It's a good
promulgated
story,
for a while. But it's a good story, and there's something. So, stories are great too. So, but there's definitely some truth to that little bit of legend. But yeah, yeah, keep training.
If people want to get a hold of you,
Well, if you're in the Tampa area, come on by. I'm out at the pool. No, I'm on Facebook, but I don't really. I'm not active.
Okay.
I'm mainly looking at Far Side cartoons and then people doing martial arts. So, but I can share my email if anybody is interested, and yeah, be happy to.
Yeah. If you want to share that, let's not put it in the show notes so you don't get junk. But if you share it in audio, people would have to listen.
Okay, so it would be joshuahodges.safety@gmail.com.
There you go. Cool. Yeah, we'll keep that out of the show notes. Make it easy. I'm going to throw it back to you in a minute to close us up, but to the audience, I mean, you went on a ride with us today, and I hope that you'll consider how many opportunities you had to stop training that you chose not to. I think that's really important for us to all recognize that we're still going. And maybe if you are watching or listening to this during a break, maybe it'll give you some motivation to say something is better than nothing. If I get up and I practice, my blocks and my kicks for 20 minutes or 2 minutes or 30 seconds, there's still value in that. And I hope that you'll consider that. And I hope you'll also consider supporting us. Go to whistlekick.com, whistlekickmartialartsradio.com, join the Patreon, support us. You can start as little as $2 a month. So Josh, how do you want to close us up today? We've talked about a bunch of different things, but what do you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I like that idea of keep training, and you'll get better if you have the most expensive gi. No, that's not it. It's persistence. Just keep at it, and if you find something you love, pursue it, because it's enriching. It makes you an interesting person. It gives you depth, and it gives you character, whether it's martial arts, music, or whatever. But put the effort in. It's worth it.